interest of time and in order to honor the time of those who arrived early or on time, we'll go ahead and get started. As we get started, please remember to change your name in Zoom, and please add your pronouns and your role in the guiding coalition process. Again, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 5th meeting in a series of Phase 2 Southeast Guiding Coalition sessions. I am Esther Mogwai, Regional Superintendent, Elementary Schools, Portland Public Schools. I'd like to extend our warmest welcome to our Board of Directors, Flow Analytics, Karina and Brick Architectural Firm, our principals, our co-chairs, and the Southeast Guiding Coalition members. The Southeast Guiding Coalition process is designed to be completed in phases. Phase 1 concluded in the spring of 2021, and we are almost midway through Phase 2. Next slide, please. May I please have a volunteer to read the land acknowledgement and anti-oppression statement? Any volunteers?
You raise your hand so we can call on you if you're interested in helping us read that. Looks like Tanya Arnold is volunteering.
Thanks, Tanya.
Happy to do it. At PPS, we strive to strengthen our relationships with the Native community and Native nations. A symbol of this commitment is a land acknowledgement. These statements bring visibility to the first peoples of our collective home. This statement is meant to provide information and context while also encouraging all of us to reflect on our current day relationship with Native people and Native experiences. We acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional land of the Chinook, Clackamas, Kalapuya, Multnomah, Wasco, Cathlamet, Tualatin, and Molalla. We also know that many other tribes made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette rivers. We honor their history and acknowledge the sacrifices they made. Let us also acknowledge the robust present-day federally recognized tribes of this area, the Grand Ronde, Siletz, and Cowlitz. In addition, I would like to acknowledge the Chinook Nation, who has been seeking federal recognition for many years. The urban Indian community is made up of tribal diversity that originates from around the country, representing 400 tribes. The urban Indian community has a vivid history made up of peoples whose journeys have brought them to Portland by ways of forced displacement or seeking more opportunities.
Next slide, please.
Today, these tribes and communities celebrate their heritage, showing resilience and tenacity that would be greatly admired by their ancestors. Within Portland Public Schools today, we serve students and families representing more than 150 different tribal nations within our education system. It is our obligation to teach accurate information, past and present, about the impact of colonization on our students, all students today, and make visible the multitude of Native families and many diverse ways Native communities and families are living in the present. We encourage every person to reflect on their own history, understand the history of colonization and genocide, and support Indigenous sovereignty, priorities, and actions. This acknowledgement is one step that we can take to improve our support of Indigenous communities in the area. In addition to acknowledging the land and those that have been here since time began, we must also remember our stolen siblings from Africa, whose labor built the vast wealth of this country. These two communities and the atrocities committed against them are intrinsically intertwined due to our existence within a white supremacist world. Everything we have is due to stolen land and stolen labor, and every system and institution that impacts our lives is built upon this legacy. It is our job to speak that truth into spaces so that we can begin to heal.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So welcome again. As I stated earlier, the Southeast Guiding Coalition process is designed to be completed in phases. Phase 1 concluded in the spring of 2021. We created a feeder pattern for Kellogg Middle School. In that process, we reviewed a lot of data in an effort to provide most reasonable possibilities within our scenarios for establishing school feeder patterns for Kellogg. Also in that process, we created opportunities for robust discussion during our meetings. The phase 2 sessions will be no different. We will analyze and evaluate the viability of scenarios created, and as always, we need and value your input. On the agenda tonight, we'll be looking at key themes from breakouts at last meeting. Karina will go more in depth with that a little bit later in the meeting. We'll have an overview of the PPS guardrails for scenario development. We will review 2 proposed scenario options and set the stage for the workshop on the 30th, which is on Saturday. Next slide, please. In prior Southeast Guardian Coalition meetings, we shared the phase 2 charge, which are to convert Harrison Park from a K-8 to a middle school. This means we will need to find a home for the K-5 students currently housed at Harrison Park. We also need to increase the enrollment at Lane Middle School. Additionally, we shared the information from the community listening sessions and briefly talked about possible school shuffle scenarios that could help attain this goal as we work on meeting the requirements of the phase 2 charge. We do realize that these are very, very passionate conversations. We know that emotions can be raw. We also know that in spite of that, we do need to hear people speak their authentic truth. So in the interest of maintaining order, civility, and being able to hear one another out, I would ask that we stay engaged. Your input, again, is of value to us. It gives us an idea of your thoughts, your desires, your wants as we plan future meetings. We ask you to speak your truth responsibly, to be mindful of the choice of words and the things that are articulated. And if there are things that you absolutely have to articulate that you think might be somewhat controversial, please feel free to send it to us as a text message or an email. We want you to, as much as possible, also listen to understand and to believe. There are no predetermined notions. Even though some responses may seem like there truly aren't any. This is the grassroots level work. We truly want your input. We want an authentic collaborative process, and we don't want to have any predetermined notions. So please just trust and believe. If you're not sure, ask, and we'll be very kind to at least explain and help you understand the perspectives. Be willing to do things differently and experience discomfort. Anytime there is change, there is a level of discomfort. We all manage change differently, but just know that we're here to support, we're here to ensure that you're successful, and we're here to provide you the opportunity to fully participate and feel heard. Expect and accept non-closure. We do our best to give everybody what they want, but in an environment like this, it is next to impossible. However, if we continue to center our students and we continue to think about the best interest for our communities, I am sure even if we don't get exactly what we want, we can come close, and we can also determine to at least live with the decisions that we've all agreed to. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Dr. O. So we're about to break into our breakout rooms like we do at the start of every meeting for our check-ins, but we figured this is a good reminder, actually, that these sessions are recorded. So they will be recorded, and everything that is entered into the chat becomes part of the public record. However, as we go into breakout rooms, we won't be able to listen live in those breakout rooms. They will be recorded. Everything in the breakout rooms is recorded, and it will all be available on the website the following week, so next week. So please bear with us that we can't do that live tonight. Part of that is translation. We want to be sure that we're able to offer real-time live translation for folks that require those services. So next, we are going to talk a little bit about our, we always do a check-in exercise. We hope that as we go into these breakout rooms, we try and make these small so that way we can get to know one another better. We ask you to share your name, your connection to the school district, And this time we really want to start with injecting some joy into the room. So want you to share what has been your greatest source of joy over the past week as we do that. Marnie's gonna break us up into some small groups to go in and do introductions, talk about the timing, and when we will all be back together.
Okay, I have them all set up. There a few of you joined since I set them up, so I'll send you. We have just about 8 minutes, so that's about 4 minutes apiece. So just get to know each other and check in. Think about joy. All right, I'm going to open the rooms right now. Off you go.
Well, we hope that you were able to experience and share some joys this week, and that there was a lot of joy happening around us. So, Marnie, will you advance the slide, please? So one of the things we wanted to start with is talking about the key themes from the breakouts at our last meeting. If you recall, in our last meeting, we were really trying to get at how to prepare for and what were kind of our greatest takeaways as we were thinking about the input that we heard in listening and learning, right? And kind of how did we process that as the Southeast Guiding Coalition? So we want to share that with you. Marnie, next, please. So some of the themes that came out of our meeting on the 7th is, some concern about a lack of representation from key schools in the dialogue sessions, specifically around Lane and Woodstock, right? Understanding that the timeline that we have to try and get this process to closure to ensure that the district can make the decisions in time to allow for funding, to ensure that that all of the schools get the funding that they need in the right allocations, but that led to potentially making it difficult to secure kind of additional feedback from some of these groups that have traditionally not been well represented and weren't represented as part of the listening and learning sessions. And so an encouragement for us to continue to invite those voices into the room. There was also an acknowledgement that we're going to likely have some contradictory feedback from the different groups, right? And acknowledge that no matter what we do as a Southeast Guiding Coalition, no matter what decision the district makes, there are going to be people that will be inevitably disappointed by the outcome for them personally, right? We also expressed that that the process or the results may perpetuate additional feelings of distrust among underserved community members, communities that have already felt distrust. That what we want to do is try and ensure that as a process and as an outcome, we are able to address that to the greatest extent possible. And one of the requests that we hope we honored with the presentation that you're going to see tonight is to be able to link more directly the proposed scenarios with educational outcomes, improved educational outcomes, specifically for BIPOC students and those with intersectional identities. And that we need to be able to set the enrollment data in a context, right? So that you all understand what the implications are, both in terms of the educational impacts and then also the Res J impacts, so racial equity and social justice. And then acknowledge that there was a challenge of working with Portland's actual neighborhood demographics when diversifying school enrollments, right? That as you're trying to create greater diversity, you can only pull people a certain direction, and we just have to acknowledge that the existing demographics will impact that. Next, Barney. And trying to think about how we can think about the people side of this, so the qualitative data and the numbers exercise to translate key performance indicators into actionable items, that the scenarios must be clearly linked to the themes from the dialogue sessions, right? So recognizing that we might not be able to get to the easiest or the quickest solution But if the goal is to create equitable experiences for all students, that something's got to shift, right? We can't just think about individual schools or individual communities, but that you really have to think about this holistically. Also acknowledge that questions about recent and ongoing impacts of the distance learning on school enrollment, right? So who are we seeing leave our schools? And when are they likely to come back, and in what form and in what communities, right? And so thinking about what is the right data point for kind of continuing these conversations. And the last two are really that as we think about really providing additional resources and expanding access to programs, that simply shifting boundaries isn't enough, right? That we really need to think about what are the other levers that can be pulled, and how does that get communicated? How does that get developed? And then lastly, that we create a process where we're able to circle back with communities that we were not able to address their needs, right? Or that expressed a concern about an impact, and the scenario was not able to take that into consideration, right? And so thinking about what are ways to go back and have transparency and have accountability in those communities was also a key aspect of what we learned. All right, Dr. O, will you take it back?
Portland Public School mission statement is to provide rigorous, high quality academic learning experience that are inclusive and joyful. In order to do that, though, we realize that some of our schools do have to have minimum numbers of student enrollment to enable us to provide the services and the programs. So tonight we will begin a more in-depth conversation about the charge along those lines. We will have conversations about the current programs that we have and why there is a need for us as we readjust to actually look at maybe co-locating some programs or maybe not co-locating others and finding different ways to support them. In our preliminary work, what we discovered is that most of our DLI schools do have a need for us to redesign the program in this process as well, just so we can create some level of equity amongst our students, amongst our schools, and better serve our communities. Next slide, please. Our overarching goals is that, number one, every student does need to have a robust academic experience at every school they attend. Our neighborhood schools, our DLI programs, our focus option programs, at any school that our kids attend, we do have to make sure that they do get a robust education that sets them up for success in life. At the middle school, in order for this to happen, we agreed that we should have at least a minimum of 500 students, because 500 students will lead to more equitable programming and we'll be able to offer the electives and the enrichments that our students need to flourish. The change from K-8 to middle schools began in 2016 with Ockley Green. And then in 2018, it was quickly followed by Harriet Tubman and Roseway Heights. And then in the spring of 2021, we saw Kellogg reopen as a middle school as well. We are now looking at Harrison Park. Harrison Park is going to go from a K-8 school to a middle school, and we do need a home for our K-5 students. We will also be increasing the enrollment at Lane Middle School, because again, in order for us to provide a robust program, we do have to have a minimum of at least 500 students at each middle school and 270 students at the elementary school. Next slide, please. What surfaced in this process? Due to the pandemic, which of course caught everybody flat-footed, the enrollment loss has been a lot greater than we expected. It is unclear how long this is going to linger. We also know that our enrollment targets have had to shift because the enrollment loss was greater and because our feeder patterns needed to change. So we are going to be looking at our boundary line adjustments to create equity. The next line is repeated, of course, 270 students minimum at the elementary school and 500 students minimum at the middle school. The high school enrollment is still growing. We have overcrowding in some of our high schools. If you remember earlier, I did say that the guiding coalition process was in phases. So we did phase 1 in the spring, phase 2, the charge is a little different, and we will be looking at the high schools in this phase as well, though minimally, in order to prepare for the next phase, which will truly include our high schools. In this process, we're looking at our DLI programs and our neighborhood programs. We surveyed our principals, we had several meetings with them. We tried to get at least a perspective on how the DLI programs were functioning at their schools. And it does require that we take a better, closer look at these programs in order for it to serve the students that it's intended to serve, and for us to do a better job of creating biliterate bilingual students upon graduation. Transfer choices, of course, and numbers of students of color will impact some of these decisions, because as you know, we don't have too many BIPOC students in the district, and the redistribution might have some impact as we make these decisions. Next slide, please. What we heard. We heard from our school leaders and our instructional leaders that access to quality programming matters. We also heard that from parents as well. We also have heard that we do want all our students to have access to quality programs regardless of their zip code. We do not want transportation to be a barrier. And as much as possible in this process, we're going to be considering all factors that may either be a hindrance or an asset as we make divisions. We also heard from our communities that diversity is very important, and that it is essential for us to probably keep the programs closest to those who will best benefit from it. The K-5 community at Harrison Park will of course have to be relocated to a different school. And we want to make sure that we maintain the racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity of that school. I don't know if you all know, but it is one of the most diverse schools in Portland Public Schools. And because of its diversity, it's got so much enrichment in that community. So we want to try to preserve that as much as possible. We also do want everyone to know that our goal is to hear from everybody. And because of that, we will have small group breakout sessions. We'll also have the opportunity to share. This is not going to be about the loudest voice. This is really going to be about our students, centering our students and providing the academic supports they need to flourish now and in the years to come. Next slide, please. What we modeled. I believe that's Margaret, right?
It is. Good evening, everyone. I want to just introduce myself. My name is Margaret Calvert, and I'm a regional superintendent. I'm Esther Dr. O's counterpart at the middle and high school level. So I'm going to share a little bit of what the framework is for what we're going to look at tonight. But I just want to acknowledge that you're going to see quite a bit of information as we go through. So we're going to provide a time shortly after I walk through some of the framework for us to have small group discussions before we go and dive deeply into the proposals as they are. One of the key pieces that we want to make sure that we state up front is that we're starting with 2 draft proposals, and that we are experiencing and anticipating that this is going to be an iterative process. So this is just the start, and what we're going to look at today is fairly expansive, and we'll start to unpack it, but that will be also followed up in the work session on Saturday in greater detail. The changes that you're going to see are going to span across the Southeast and somewhat into the Northeast part of the city, and will impact 21 schools. As I said, this is a start. We're going to begin a community engagement process the week of November 8th. The charge of the Southeast Guiding Coalition will be to decide on proposed changes based on that community input. The proposals will change. We expect them to do so, and a final recommendation from the Southeast Guiding Coalition will be made in early January, with a planned board vote in early February. In the coming weeks, we will share information with the community, and it's going to be important for us to take time to listen, reflect, and revise. As part of the engagement plan, here are some key dates that will be helpful to keep in mind. Here we are at Thursday, October 28th. A message with a high-level summary was sent out to families. I believe it's been sent already. And we're going to share a Guiding Coalition meeting. The recording will be posted later. Beginning tomorrow, there will be summaries that will be up on the dashboard. They will be shared in a variety of ways, some directly through school newsletters, websites, social media, and other outlets. On Saturday, we're going to follow up with a workshop where we'll take extended time to look through the proposals and engage in discussion. And then with the eye to making revisions next Thursday, which is November 4th. The formal community engagement opportunities will begin in the 8th and run through the 8th through the 16th, with an update to the school board on November 16th. Next slide, please. As part of the process of designing the models, we laid out some non-negotiables. What we heard was that Harrison Park K-5 we wanted to move together as a group, and part of what we'll see is that it moves in this scenario, in the scenarios you'll see tonight, to the Clark campus. It also meets the needs of proximity that was stated as an ideal from the previous listening session. In addition, Creative Science School relocates and becomes a K-8 focus option neighborhood school, similar to models that we see at Sunnyside K-8 and at Buckman K-5. Its location is dependent on the proposals. In one proposal, it will be located at Woodstock, and the other, it'll be located at Arleta. There'll be seats for neighborhood students and then fewer transfers in. So it starts with a priority to the neighborhood that it is going to be located in, and then in addition, there will be transfers into the school. A couple of other significant non-negotiables. The first is the Chinese immersion programs will combine into a whole school DLI, a whole DLI school. In one proposal, that program is located at Bridger, and the other, it is located at Woodstock. And finally, the Spanish immersion programs will combine again into whole school DLI program. Lent is the only whole school, I hate to keep saying this backwards, the whole DLI school in proposal A, while Bridger, along with Lent, become whole school whole DLI schools. There are a couple of places where it's interesting to just think about some schools that have these experiences already. And so just pointing out that Rigler meets the whole DLI school that is pulling from a specific neighborhood. And similarly, then looking to Sunnyside K-8 and Buckman for similar models to what Creative Science School would look like. Next slide, please. So this is a significant adjustment that we're proposing here in the guardrails. We will have an opportunity to talk about that and breakout shortly. There are three significant reasons that this is part of the design. First, native speakers and linguistically diverse students. Access to a high quality dual language program is the primary social justice model that supports closing their achievement gap. Second, in co-located school settings, we see some challenges with elementaries being able to support both language strands, and that we believe that bringing them together will lead to greater focus. So one of the things, there are a couple bullet points here in particular, that we will see greater focus on emergent bilingual student needs, as well as for the students in English only programs. So it serves the benefits both for the DLI programs and also the K-5 neighborhood programs. It allows for focused professional development time and for the staff to be working from an instructional model that is coherent and is spread across the building. It also allows for greater articulation and coherence across initiatives, and we don't see the sense of two different programs in a specific space. The struggle to balance instructional schedule for DLI students to receive all their minutes has been a challenge in co-located programs, and we believe the DLI whole school program will alleviate those challenges. And then balances in class size. We often see that you will have a strand in a neighborhood side or the immersion program side that is significantly larger than the other. And if we are in places where it's a whole school model, there will be more coherence and flexibility across classes. Finally, when we operate multiple DLI sites, it means the bilingual educators and support staff to support those programs are spread across multiple campuses. And we believe that bringing them together in one place will enrich and provide more robust programs. Next slide, please. So we also want to acknowledge that we've been building DLI programs in Portland for a lot of years. And it's been through the dedication of incredible teachers, staff, students, and families to have worked really for decades to create very rich, robust programs. The challenges that we are seeing are system challenges and are not located at a specific site. But we do believe that the challenges, that one mechanism for overcoming these challenges is to create more equitable, sustaining program in the future through this whole school model. Whole DLI and whole neighborhood schools offer greater focus and support. There's more opportunities for, as I mentioned, cohesive professional learning, collaboration in an instructional model that is coherent across the school. It allows for multiple strands of peers in classrooms and both whole school models for neighborhood schools and DLI schools. And there will be fewer barriers to DLI entry for newly arrived native speaking students. Next slide, please. So we're going to pause here for a moment. We've shared some significant information and want to take time to go through and really allow there to be discussion in small groups for people to process, ask clarifying questions, think about what are some of your key takeaways from what we've just shared? What are the impacts to your community? What impacts there may be to marginalized or underrepresented communities? And then we'll end up coming back to a large group, I think, after the small group work. But the key is that we want to make sure that people have an opportunity to process, discuss, ask questions. We'll capture the questions, and then we'll come back to a whole group before we share further details. So I think we're going to be moved into, Marnie is going to move us into small groups. We should have about 15 minutes. Oh my gosh, we're right on the dot at 6:45. So I think we'll be back in the whole group at 7.
Okay, yes, off you go into our original 3 groups, and we'll see you back here in 15 minutes.
Welcome back. So thank you everyone for taking time in the breakout rooms to process the guardrails. So I believe now it is time for us to share the proposals with you prior to us going on break. So I believe, Jed, that you are going to do that, correct?
I'm planning to do that, yes.
Okay.
Shall I share my screen, Jeff?
Yeah, so I'm seeing those slides here. They may be a little bit duplicative, and I'm just seeing that I was assigned to them. I've got my own set, but let's just go through these really quickly, starting at 24 there. Yeah, so I'm going to go into this bit in more detail here on my separate set of slides that we're going to get shared out with folks. But essentially, the draft proposal is a set of those program changes. It's going to include maps that show any of the feeder school shifts and the boundary adjustments. So very detailed maps for that. For each of those proposals, we estimate enrollment, demographics, and as you recall from a meeting a couple times ago, our racial equity impact measures, we've calculated those relative to the current year baseline to see how the proposals are performing on those fronts. And so there is, as folks have seen here, quite a bit of relocation and reconfiguration of DLI and focus options in this. So there's a lot to cover on that front. Just want to highlight that these are program change decisions that have been recommended by the PPS instructional leaders, and you've heard some from them tonight, which is great. The input should really be centering on the strengths and challenges of those siting options and the suggestions for how we're going to implement those changes. And we'll get into a lot more of this on Saturday after folks have had time to digest this a bit more. And I guess just kind of the last thing here is program changes. They do happen all at one time, and they're not phased in over multiple years. That's the implementation plan right now as set by the district. So next slide. So the feeder school shifts, we do have some reassignments of whole elementary school zones from one middle school to another. I'll show the details on that, but that per board policy, those are usually phased in over multiple years. So it's a little bit different than the program location change piece there that would happen more quickly. Boundary adjustments and reassignments of the geographic areas. If that's going from one elementary to another or middle school to another. So all of those adjustments that you'll see in the proposals, they're going to apply from grades K to 8. And alternatives can be proposed, and that's largely what we're going to be working on and maybe get a preview of on Saturday, some of those ideas that folks have. But again, per board policy, those are usually, again, phased in over multiple years. If we do see a situation where that needs to be accelerated, it can be. Next slide. So I'm just going to touch on this one real briefly. We're going to see some more images like this, but this harkens back to the racial equity impact measures that were shown a few meetings ago. This is for the 2021 baseline. And just a reminder for folks, we've got 4 different pieces that we're looking at here. How our middle schools are doing with respect to being above or below that 500 enrollment. How elementary schools are doing relative to that 270 minimum enrollment. And then kind of on the flip side of this, and I just want to note that these bars you want to see be lower, the purple bars, how many students are in those high utilization buildings, right? The buildings with greater than 80% utilization that we would tend to not like to see. And then really the proximity factor is the 4th one here. What is that percentage of students that are within 1 mile of the school that they attend? So you're going to see a comparison of this back to the proposals. So we'll just move to the next slide here. So things that aren't in the draft proposals. So the specific student assignments and those teacher shifts for next year, those are not what you'll see in the materials, and the board's going to vote on a final plan that will be part and parcel of that. Specific program impacts, those are still yet to be determined on special education, early ed. We know that there are issues with high school and over utilization, and so there may be some links to that based on the recommendations that come out of this group. There is potential impact on Title I funding as we see some of the demographics shift at the schools. And of course, there's transportation impacts here as we see changes to attendance areas. But generally, the district is going to provide buses to neighborhood schools and those students who live more than a mile from their elementary school and more than a mile and a half from the middle school. And the whole DLI schools, those transportation plans are to be developed.
Yeah. Jed, we're about to head into our break. Will you do me a favor and link in the chat to the dashboard? So we're about to take a 10-minute break. And so, but wanted to provide the dashboard to you all in advance of that break. So that way, if you wanted to start poking around, you could. We will come back and we will start to, again, process this data in small groups and then carry the conversation forward. So it is 7:08. So why don't we plan on, we're actually running a little bit ahead of schedule. So why don't we plan on meeting back here at 7:20, gives us essentially 12 minutes, 11 minutes to come back and process this information together. So
and we'll need the chat enabled here for me to post that.
Yeah, and then also, Jed, you're also going to be sharing the dashboard, but as well as the 2 proposal links. Thank you.
Yes.
Recording in progress.
Thank you, Gail.
Recording stopped.
Uh-oh.
Recording in progress.
Hopefully people are coming back. Good. I am trying to see if I'm getting people back. I just see a bunch of blank screens. All right, we do have the majority of our people back. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I did want to, it sounded like there was a request for the district to send out contact information between members, and just wanted to remind those who were part of phase 1 and for any of you who are joining in phase 2, the district has set up a communication tool for SEGC members. It's called Discord. It is everything that's conducted on there is public record. And tomorrow, Megan was saying she will send that email out tomorrow, along with the links to the presentations tonight, all of the links for the meeting this evening. So if you're looking to communicate with your fellow SEGC members, that is the vehicle that the district is set up to do so.
Yeah, we just want to make sure that we do it without the district being able to collect our messaging to one another.
Yeah, again, we want to invite folks to remember our group agreements and ensure that we are trying to create constructive environments where we're working together within the confines of the SEGC. Jen, I think you are now going to present the scenarios.
That's right. And this time I'm going to take control of the screen, if that's okay, Marnie. All right. Let's get back to you here and silence this. Thanks for bearing with me for a second here. Okay. All right, can I get confirmation from folks? All right, Karina, thank you. Okay. All right, so just for folks who may not know me, there's a few new faces. I'm Jed Roberts, Senior GIS Analyst with Flow Analytics. And so my goal for the next 15 or so minutes is to get you familiar with the draft proposal materials. This is so you can begin to formulate your thoughts on the strengths and weaknesses of each of these and what you might recommend to improve them for the Southeast region's students. So before we get started, there are a few things that I need to say. First, this content is very dense and is likely to feel overwhelming. So please just take your time to understand it and the opportunity to ask questions, which we'll have tonight and beyond tonight. So there are also just many flavors of information, and that's on purpose. So we want you to find the tools that are going to work best for you to build your understanding. Please do not expect or feel that we expect you to be expert in this material immediately. And finally, this is your first opportunity to ask questions, but like I mentioned, it's not going to be your last. So I want to quickly walk you through some symbols that you'll see throughout these materials. On the left side of this slide, we have a set of symbols that are used to denote the enrollment method for each school. Our traditional neighborhood schools use the building and flag symbol here. These are the schools that are enrolled through their attendance area. Next, we have schools that house both neighborhood programs and dual language immersion programs, also known as our co-located schools. So some current examples include Atkinson and Harrison Park. And at the bottom, we have schools that have a whole school, typically lottery model, either dual language immersion or a focus option school. So current examples of those are Richmond with its Japanese DLI and creative science. And then on the right side, we're going to apply these colors to the symbols to denote the grades that are serviced at each school here. And so we have K-5 elementary schools in yellow, the K-8 schools in kind of that pink salmon color, and 6-8 middle schools in blue. And you're going to see these symbols in the proposals for schools as they are, as their state in that particular proposal. So this is just a quick slide here just to drive home the concept that programs are nested. They have a nested relationship with schools, and that is just that they exist within the schools. And you can see that we've got different configurations here to match the school symbols that I just mentioned. We've got co-located neighborhood program and dual language immersion, and then we've got schools that are neighborhood only or dual language immersion only, and you can see how they tie to those symbols. Just one more kind of note on nesting here. Just as programs are nested within schools, schools are nested within attendance areas, which we are also calling a feeder pattern. So our middle school attendance areas are within our high school attendance areas, and then our elementary attendance areas are within the middle school attendance area, kind of the Russian doll thing there for those schools. And then you see our K-8 schools, they're standing alone within the high school attendance area because they have that full K through 8 grade servicing there. I just want to, there's a couple pieces of fine print here, just a couple notes. First, that the lottery enrolled programs, they have a feeder pattern too, but it is not one that is dependent on attendance areas. Now there are some exceptions, but for the most part, they stay within a high school cluster, those lottery enrolled programs. Second footnote here is that there are some rare instances where attendance areas are split. And there's an example of that actually in Southeast right now, where Lane Middle School is split between Cleveland and Franklin high schools. You're not going to see any of those splits in the proposals that, that you'll be seeing tonight. So with those concepts reviewed, I'm just going to dive into the proposal materials here. And this is what you're going to see for each of the packets in the draft proposal. And you have the links now. I'm sure you're digging through this stuff already. But the first section is a summary with graphics. And they'll, again, be these icons that I mentioned a little bit earlier here. Then you're going to see an overview map for the region that captures all the changes across the region. And then you'll see school by school maps grouped by K-5 and by grade 6-8 for those boundary changes with more detail as to where the boundary currently exists and where it's proposed to be. And so first, I just want to point out the text at the top here, which is that these proposals are intended to be evaluated for their long-term and regional impacts. And I mentioned some of the phased implementation pieces a little bit before the break there. So each draft proposal has a set of summary pages that feature a narrative summary by grade serviced, which you can see here on the left. And there's a bunch of highlighting on this one, which you don't see in the actual PDF materials, because I wanted to do here is just highlight the elements of the proposals that are different from one another. And so with this proposal, Harrison Park becomes the regional hub for both Spanish and Chinese DLI at the middle school level. We're also boosting Lane's enrollment through expanding its attendance area. A main driver in this proposal is creating all whole school Chinese DLI and Spanish schools that are close to native speakers, which is reflected in the conversion of Bridger to a Chinese DLI regional hub and Lent to a Spanish DLI regional hub. And then also at the K-5 level, as you've heard, Clark becomes the site of the neighborhood program that moves out of Harrison Park during its conversion to a middle school. And then at the K-8 level, in this proposal A, creative science is moving to Woodstock and is enrolled again through that primarily neighborhood model through an attendance area. And then moving over to the right side of the page, you see the grade configuration and enrollment policy changes. And there are 3 schools here, which are all involved in the conversion of Harrison Park to a middle school and that movement of creative science. So contrasting here with proposal B, which again, whole school DLIs are featured, but are more central and cited where the well-established programs exist today. And there are 2 whole school DLI sites for Spanish immersion here. And so let me just walk through these pieces here. So you see Harrison Park highlighted again here. And the reason for that is that it's hosting only Spanish DLI along with its neighborhood program, not also Chinese DLI. Lane becomes the regional hub for Chinese DLI in this proposal. At the elementary level, we see that Bridger is still involved as a whole school option, but this time as Spanish rather than Chinese, and that Woodstock is the site of the Chinese regional hub. Lent, however, does retain a whole school Spanish DLI model, but it is neighborhood based. So enrolled differently than the primarily lottery approach that's currently implemented. And then at the K-8 level, creative science is moving to Arleta in proposal B. And you see those elements highlighted in the grade reconfiguration and policy changes. So next page is to just point out the schools and programs in Southeast that are not affected within the proposal here. I'm just highlighting one program that's different between the 2 here, and that is that in proposal A, although Lent does become a whole school DLI, there is not a direct impact to the program that exists currently, other than it joins with some additional programs. And then you see proposal B here, that it's really the same list, minus that highlight. And so now just digging in a bit on the program movement, I'm going to walk folks through this piece here. So two tables that you're seeing on the left side are the K5 and K8 program moves. And on the far left side of that table, you see the current site of the program. In the middle, you see the program in question. So at the top of this particular one, K5 Chinese DLI. And then on the right side of the table, you see the proposed site. So for K5 Chinese DLI, we have both the Harrison Park and Woodstock programs moving into Bridger, which becomes that whole school Chinese DLI site. You see some similar movements here with Spanish DLI. You see the footnote there with creative science moving over to Woodstock, and that it also converts to that neighborhood focus program, similar to Sunnyside. And then just really the differences here that you see are around those big pieces with the creative science move, and just where the site is going to be for the different whole school models. And you see Lent highlighted at the very bottom on the left there, and that it gives up its neighborhood in this particular one. But in proposal B, it actually retains a neighborhood. Then on the right side, set up very similarly, are the middle schools with Hosford's Chinese DLI moving to Harrison Park, and both Mount Tabor and Kellogg's Spanish DLI programs moving also to Harrison Park. Kellogg is a little bit different in proposal B. So I'll flip over now to proposal B to see the contrasting pieces of this, which again are really visual versions of the summary. Those
Recording
pieces.
in
And I just wanted to
progress.
highlight again the footnote for Lent moving its K5 program there, and that you see that Marysville is highlighted as the default opt-out for the neighborhood, the Lent neighborhood students who would elect not to be a part of the Spanish DLI program. So that would be its partner school, similar as Rigler and Scott in Northeast. And again, you see Woodstock on this list here for the migration of its K5 program, with it becoming a whole school Chinese DLI here. So that's the different highlight that you see for that piece. And then I mentioned we do have movement of Chinese DLI here. So you see Harrison Park showing up as a current site of 6-8 Chinese DLI, that moving to Lane. Lane showing up for the first time on this slide. And then Kellogg, it's a little bit of a different model here, and that Kellogg would retain the group of students coming from Lent up at the 6-8 level, but the students currently at Atkinson and Bridger would be assigned over to Harrison Park. So a little bit of a split of that program there. Now I'm going to get into the boundary changes, and there's a lot of differences here. And you see that I'm mentioning C maps for detail under the headers for both of these. So that's what I encourage folks to do to get the most out of this. But if you just want a reference for which schools are involved in boundary changes, this is a place to do that. I've highlighted schools on the left side and on the right side. And for these tables here, it's depicting which schools are transferring attendance area to another school. So a boundary change results in, for example, with Arleta, there's a couple boundary changes that occur where former Arleta attendance area is now assigned to Creston in one change, and Woodmere in part of a different change. And so different schools involved in different changes. Much of this movement is to make room for neighborhood students that were formerly at the schools that are being proposed for whole school DLI. So that's a big part of this at the K-5 level. At the 6-8 level, I want to point out primarily the feeder change column. That's something you don't see for the K-5 boundary changes. There are schools that are currently assigned as feeders to some of these schools that switch in the proposal. So Hosford, I'll start there, with Woodstock currently being a feeder to Hosford, but converting to a K-8 creative science program that actually drops out as an official feeder to Hosford. Mount Tabor, in its attendance area change, moves the Atkinson School to feed over to Hosford. And Roseway Heights moves the Vestal feeder over to feed to Mount Tabor. The next slide here shows these contrasts. Again, you see some schools that are now receiving areas from different schools that weren't before. And you can flip between these to kind of see those pieces, and these are being PDF'd and will be shared out before the night is over, because I know folks will want to see the highlight here. So just want to again highlight literally and figuratively that Kellogg in this case is losing Arleta as a feeder because of that conversion to a K-8 hosting creative science. Mount Tabor in this proposal B, Atkinson moves into the Kellogg feeder. And Roseway Heights, again with Vestal, this time instead of Mount Tabor, Harrison Park is the feeder for Vestal up at the middle school level. So again, just I showed this in the presentation before the break. Just want to point out for the racial equity impact, we do see that this proposal is pretty solid for improving access to the larger programs that meet that minimum enrollment that we're looking for. But you see it's a pretty large number of impacted students with nearly 3,000 total and 500 emerging bilingual students. And I think a lot of that is due to program movement for the DLI piece there, certainly. And then with draft proposal B, also improves access to larger programs, particularly for Black and Native and ELL students, but not for all students. There's about 500 fewer students that are impacted by this, but I think, again, you'll see that this becomes a tension as we're trying to provide that baseline enrollment, that you also tend to need to move students around as well. So I'm just going to get into now the kind of nitty gritty of reading the maps here. So I want to start with the overview map. And I've just taken a cutout here of the legend of the map. And I wanted to point out two very important legend items here. And those are the change areas that are depicted. And so the cross-hatching that you see in those change areas, they're going in different directions based on whether it's a K-5 boundary change or a 6-8 boundary change. And you see that show up here in this example, where we have an area that kind of looks like that chain link fence, which is an area that is experiencing both an attendance area change at the K-5 and the 6-8 level. But if you look just next to it there, there's an area with only grade 6-8 boundary change occurring there. So just a bit of contrast there. And you're going to see these codes on here that I'm going to get into in a minute to help you understand those. So for each of the change areas, we have developed a code to help us track those as we look at different scenarios going forward here. And so I just wanted to explain what you're seeing on the maps with respect to those codes. So the first two-letter code is the area. It signifies that the area was formerly in this particular school's attendance area. And then the two-letter code in the middle, that indicates that the area is now in this school's attendance area. And then the numeric code at the end there, that's to allow us to track how often we're going to see variations on a theme here, or to ensure that we're not looking at the same change over and over again. And so you see the school codes here, those are included in the packet as well for shorthand reference with respect to these codes. So just to give you a little bit of a visual to go along with that, this is Whitman, I believe in proposal A. And you can see, I'll start on the left here, that there's an area that was formerly Woodstock attendance area that's moving to Whitman, denoted by that WSWT01. We have an area that was formerly Lewis K5 that is moving to Whitman, designated by LWWT01. I just want to point out on the map itself, the lines that you're seeing. So the dotted line indicates the current boundary for Whitman, and that thick dark line there, that is the proposed boundary in the proposal. And so you can see for this particular school, that is actually a pretty big expansion of its attendance area. Alongside these maps, below the legend, you will see a table that lists the number of students attending neighborhood programs in each of these areas. So these are the students that would be reassigned if it were happening based on the numbers that in this count are actually from 2020, our last official count here. But it gives us an estimate of how many kids, especially relatively speaking, as we look across those change areas, would be affected. So we've got a number of resources here. Much of this has been shared out already. We've got the scenario dashboard. That's the first link here. That's going to let you compare at the school and program level, side by side, these two proposals, as well as the 2021 baseline. So that link has been made available to folks. I just wanted to repost the link to the baseline dashboard that just gives you a bit more detail about the 2021 baseline. And then we've got the map books that we've posted up, and we'll just have a couple other ways for folks to get to that. And then finally, because I want to keep to time here, I just wanted to show this slide about the scenario dashboard and just point out that there is a link to an instruction guide, and it is very helpful. A lot of thought was put into it. And if you start there, it should answer quite a few of your questions about using the scenario dashboard. It really does have some very similar functionality to the baseline dashboard that we showed back in late September. It's just a little bit different layout that you'll see there. So start there, and then we're of course happy to answer questions. And with that, that's my slideshow.
Yeah, thanks, Jed. Can you stop sharing for a minute?
I sure
Jed,
can.
there was a question about middle school assignment for neighborhood students in whatever school CSS ends up with. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Let's see, is it in the chat?
Nope.
Okay, so the neighborhood, it enrolls through the neighborhood primarily, similar to Sunnyside. So it would have the relationship that Sunnyside has with its nearby middle schools.
So this is Judy. Enrollment and Transfer Center. And let me help clarify that there's also opt-out choices for students who live in that area and would want to maintain a comprehensive middle school or an all neighborhood elementary school. So we will have more information actually on Saturday about some of these sort of transition and assignment pieces.
Okay, I believe, Margaret, you were going to address some concerns that were brought up in the breakout rooms around meeting changes and what supports we're going to provide for folks who couldn't make it tonight or next Saturday or this Saturday.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. So there are a couple pieces that I think I just want to address directly, and one is relates to why we're meeting tonight and not last week. So I just want to acknowledge that as you're looking through what is in front of you, the complexity of the proposals and looking through the scenarios took a little longer for us to adjust and make some of the moving to get the scenarios and the proposals laid out. It just is complicated and pretty detailed work. And so as we were working through it, we just needed a little more time to get them in place, get the dashboards ready, get everything ready to roll. So that was the reason for the delay. Secondly, there's a message was sent out tonight to the PPS community. It is translated, and I, as a PPS parent, received it. And I was looking at the translated versions and looking at the message that went out. So if you're a PPS parent, you may have that in your inbox. It went out right around 6 this evening. It's in. It also shows and has ways for families who could not be here tonight to access some of the material, and then also that there are some translated supports that are identified in that message itself. And then finally, I know we made an adjustment to the date on Saturday, and there were some concerns about the complications of planning for Saturdays and the change and on the weekend. So one, we want to thank people for hanging in there with us and their flexibility. If for some reason people cannot make it to Saturday, which is it's scheduled to be from 10 to 1, it will be videotaped or recorded. Videotaped, that's kind of, we're old school, I guess. Sorry about that. It'll be recorded and available online. So those are some of the things that we are committed to doing to provide folks some access. And then we'll also be holding office hours next week for folks to, as you're processing information, to ask questions and get follow-up. It is a lot of information. So I just want to acknowledge that this is very dense. Jed, thank you for taking the time to walk us all through the various icons and maps and looking at the dashboard. So we'll take some time to start to dig into it. We'll have more time on Saturday to look at it. It's complex. It is a region-wide area. And so thinking about how what the interplay is, talking through what that looks like will be some of the work that we're doing today, and then we'll do some more on Saturday. So I think
thank you, Margaret.
Yep.
Yeah. So the goal, we're going to go back into our breakout groups, and the goal of that, again, as Margaret was saying, right now, we recognize the fire hose of information that we're providing to you all. And so want to be able to allow time for people to get questions answered about how to understand the data. So that way you can take time between now and Saturday to look at that, to get your questions in order, to really start to think about how these can be refined. And so the goal is to, in these breakout rooms, focus on technical questions, anything that you have about how to access the data or how to unpack the data. So I believe Marnie is going to put us back in our same breakout rooms
Karina.
for about, oh, go ahead, Dr. O.
Karina, can I just jump in really quickly?
You may.
Remember that we talked about our agreements in the beginning, that we should stay engaged as much as possible. We should manage our emotions. I know that this is high level work and it is very emotional and people are very passionate because of their positions. As much as possible and as much as is reasonable, please continue to center the students. Think about the collective good for all. And just from that lens and our RESG lens, pay close attention to what the needs are. If you give us your questions, we are most likely going to try to figure out ways to honor them, respond to them, or get back to you. So good luck, and in good faith, just believe.
So I'll send us off into our rooms again. Note takers, if you're sharing your screen, there are some examples of sample documents that are old and just sample if you want to look at the keys and to begin to understand that language and the graphic language.
Yeah, and there will be a flow person in every room, and there will also be a district subject matter expert in every room. So we should have the ability to process the questions around the data with the folks that each of us have in our room. So thank you, Marnie.
Okay, here we go.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Sorry. It sounds like we still have many questions to process in both in terms of kind of some of the technical data and then in terms of the impacts and some of the guardrails. So I believe, and facilitators, correct me if I'm wrong, that we captured at least the majority of the questions that we heard. And the goal is between now and Saturday, twofold. One is to capture those questions and try and bring answers to those to you as best we can, as best as the district can on Saturday. And then the second is, I think Andy said it best, I just need to sit with the data. I'm sure I have a million questions, but I just need to sit with the data and process it on for a couple of hours to be sure that I'm able to understand it. So I believe that really is kind of any big showstoppers that kind of came to you in this that you think would be helpful for everyone else in terms of the data to be able to acknowledge.
Maybe some of the data is not accurate is what we learned.
Oh, sorry, Andrew, I think what I heard you say is potentially the data is not as accurate as, is that what you said? That's what you learned in your room?
Yeah, that potentially the data is not accurate. So there may be a review that would be helpful specifically in terms of enrollment at Bridger and whether portables are still being considered as part of the like, is that considered the maximum enrollment calculates in portables, whereas we had heard in the past that it should not include portables, but we're not seeing a breakout between portables and non-portables. 2 strands versus 3 strands is what I think Dee pointed out, but that was one of the things that came up in a couple of areas, was whether that data was, how the data was being calculated.
Okay, and maybe
and whether
Jed,
that would be accurate.
Sorry, Andrew, didn't mean to.
Oh, that's fine, sorry.
Jed, maybe I can call on you to talk a little bit about the reliability of the data, if you will.
Yeah, so modulars are not included in any of the capacity calculations or utilization calculations. That's been a decision early on by the planning team to not include those.
I would defer to Dee's questions at this point regarding that, because I think she was pointing out it looked like modulars were still included in that number.
It's showing utilization at 95% with 3 strands, and it was our understanding from Bridger's one of the smaller schools, and it was our understanding that there's really only space there for 2 strands comfortably without having people double up with 3 strands. We don't have counselors' offices. We don't have special education services. So it would just be nice to get some clarification because this feels like the same number that we had with the modulars.
And I
Yeah,
have
just
another
to
question
piggyback
about
on
the
that,
data.
since I
Yeah.
was
Hold on one
in,
second. Let's allow one person at a time.
thank
Hi,
you. Just to
Jennifer.
add on to Dee's comment about the capacity in room and modulars, we were talking about that, you know, the dashboard shows, for example, Bridger at 413 capacity in proposal A, and that would make, if proposal A were to go through, that would have it be at 94.9% capacity, whereas Atkinson, for example, that capacity is 567, and it leaves a neighborhood school at 48% capacity, which is barely the minimum enrollment. So I'm not sure. I think there is a need to go back and look at the data and the capacity, and maybe even think about classrooms, because we know that you know, capacity is one aspect of a building, but we also know that the number of classrooms is another aspect. And so, like Dee said, maybe at Bridger, that might include every single classroom, like art and learning center and music, but it may not be realistic as far as actually having that many students in the building, kind of like we're seeing with Kellogg this year. We know that there was a capacity of a certain number of students at Kellogg, but we also know that as it is now, with the addition of Creston's neighborhood families that were added, it's really not a feasible number, which is why in these proposals were, I think, one of the priorities or one of the pieces we were looking at was lowering that enrollment at Kellogg.
And I'm wondering as well if the data can show the waitlisted number for people who are trying to get into DLI programs. Right now, Atkinson or now DLI programs, all classes are capped at the maximum because that's how many can take. But we have heard that there's over list of hundreds or 150 or plus people trying to get into this DLI programs for all of them. So I think that would really help to know if there is that huge of a demand for DLI programs in those areas as well.
Okay. Thank you. We'll be sure that we have that. Yes, Oscar.
Hi, at the very end of our session, somebody mentioned, I think it was Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, we were just talking about transparency and the overcrowding at Franklin and Grant. And can we know if this data, if this information, is our feedback going to be implemented in their decision or their with ours? Like, where are we at with that? Because I would assume they have their own priorities, and not having to be so crowded is a huge one for them. So what's going to drive, I guess, is my question or comment.
Yeah. Margaret?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Thank you for that question. So there are, as mentioned up front, right? So there's the process that we're going on right now with the Southeast Guiding Coalition is addressing
Recording in progress.
They will, I think what is helpful is to hear and to listen to and look at what's happening with the Southeast Guiding Coalition to inform and hear some of the things. But a high school enrollment balancing process won't be taken as a system at this time. So we're looking at, every year we look at what are some mitigating circumstances to address what's happening in schools. So it's a sort of a short-term, long-term discussion, The hope, and I think that I'm hearing this, it's surfaced a couple times, right, in the conversations this evening. The hope is not to do and undo, right, and then redo like in successive years. So it's part of like just being very attentive to thinking through how things are landing. But really for the high school pieces, it is a short term. We're looking at, you know, something very short term before we look at the system, the high school system as a whole.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay, with that,
can you clarify a little bit more? Like, is it what's driving? Like, is this information going to be shared to them or them with ours? Like, just because in the newspaper too, it said that like this process was going to be that high school process was going to be similar to this process in the sense of like, you know, the Southeast Guiding Coalition and creating groups and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, and ultimately, when we look at the high school system as a whole, we'll end up engaging. I mean, it's very different because it's an entire city, right? Like, I mean, it's the level of complexity that you're looking at right now with elementaries and middles is like what kind of starts to happen at the system level, right? For all the high schools. What will inform, right, is one is not necessarily driving the other, right? So one will inform, and I think what we're acknowledging right now is that we have to make some decisions about how to support schools and students in some particular points. So, for example, we look at things like we're talking about modulars and various others. So, what are the things we can do to like use space utilization, and with like, so we're looking at options for how do we do that. And for example, this year with Franklin, you know, we were looking at literally room spaces, and we said, okay, what can we do to make sure that we have students in enough spaces, enough rooms? And we looked at neighboring schools and said, is there a classroom that we can use? So things like that are the things that we're considering and thinking about how do we make that happen, knowing that we're going to enter into a larger conversation in the near future, right? Does that help or? Yeah, okay, thanks.
So, okay, I think I have, Elizabeth has her hand up, and I think after Elizabeth, we'll close the session. And yes, hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Esther. Thank you guys all. I think just what I heard Margaret say is, you know, as you move into looking at the high school work and having an eye to not probably committing to not undoing the work of this, I think that if we are encumbering future conversations around the high school program with the work of us, that we should just kind of own that responsibility and knowledge in this space right now, so that in 3 years, we don't come back and go, oh, well, you guys made this decision, and then that has this impact. I know that there's challenges with coupling the processes, but I do think there has to be some kind of transparency about if this, then that, to the extent that we can, because we don't want to have to redo things, right? I totally get that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
So
okay, Dr. O, will you close us out?
Yes, I do want to take this opportunity to thank you all very much for your input, your feedback, and staying engaged, even though the emotions and passions were high, they were palpable. Thank you for keeping them in check so that we can truly hear your heart. We will continue this conversation on Saturday. Please feel free to join us from 10 to 1 p.m. We have captured a lot of the questions that you raised. And as a district team, we'll go back to the drawing board and take a look at all the concerns, all the questions, and all the suggestions, and come back again with our best case scenario. Thank you for helping us refine our thoughts and polish the process as we move forward. We will continue to do our best to stay transparent, truthful, and supportive, while also taking your input along the way.
Why are we shutting down so fast? Right? I think there was more questions and there's 35 minutes still in our meeting. What's the rush?
Well, so Mr. Oscar, what we do at the end is we take all the questions that we have, and we actually have a meeting at the end of these sessions. And from there, from then we gather and prepare for the next upcoming session.
Okay. Normally it seems like a more natural finish. This time it seemed like, hey, everybody stop, we're out of here. So it just sounded different.
No, I
Thank
think
you,
that the struggle that we're having, I don't think that's the case. I think we don't want to get into processing because we know that we need a good amount of time to process this data on Saturday. And so we were always struggling with how much do you get into that on Thursday and how much do you get into that on Saturday, right? And so we want to try and create kind of a clean break so that way we are able to have time to digest the data and then come together on Saturday to be able to process it.
Right. So the emails and the evaluations will be sent out to you by email. So if you can complete those and send them to us, we'll also factor that into our meeting tonight. And then on Saturday when we meet, we'll pick up from where we left off. Pardon my voice.
And if I could just offer one thing before we go. This is exceedingly hard to do in an online environment. And I just want to appreciate people taking the time to try to navigate between, screens, dashboards, various other pieces. And, I just know that this is, and it's very dense information. So, I know we're going to take time to capture questions, really try to help clarify information and highlight, the questions that you have. So if there's a space, if we can just, again, reiterate where questions can be gathered so that we can, again, turn around and have, look at this, dig into the scenarios again on Saturday after people kind of process all that. It's a lot of information, just sort of what the pieces are. So
totally understand the complexity of it.
Yeah.
But we're already talking about having poor sample sizes from people and then shifting questions from this room where we're already here into a small group we know is not going to be attended well.
Yeah.
So, where are we getting our information and who are we really trying to help? That's where I sit.
Dr. O, can I just ask quickly? I see on the agenda that it talks about working on boundaries, testing different boundary changes, but I just want to clarify, are we being told these are the two scenarios that we have to choose from and that's it? And other feeder schools are
actually not. No, you're not being told that at all. What we're saying is this is our best thinking at this time, and we need you to help us reshape our thinking based on what your observations and your perspectives are. So that's not what we're saying at all.
Because it just mentions boundaries, but there's also a discussion about feeder schools and.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. This question is for Margaret. When you said we're looking at options for Franklin, including neighborhood schools, can the assumption be made that the goal will be to under-enroll Atkinson, move the DLI program under-enroll Atkinson, and for Franklin High School to take the building at Atkinson, as they're already having high school classes over at the Atkinson Elementary School right now?
No. That is, I appreciate the question. Thank you for asking directly. And that is not, we're not looking to have a satellite campus at Atkinson for Franklin. I was just using that as an example of what, when we're looking at space constraints, what are some of the things that we consider? So that is, yes, that's not the intent. So not at all. But I was just using it as an example. I'm sorry, if you're still speaking, I can't hear you because you're on mute. So.
Oh, I was saying thank you for answering.
Well, again, I want to thank you all for your time tonight. This is a real heavy lift. It is very complex information, complex data, and I'm aware that some of you have been through this process before. We're hoping to land something that will be in the best interest of our students and our academic programs, and that will position Portland Public Schools in a way where all communities feel supported moving forward. Again, please hang on to your ideas, your thoughts, bring them on Saturday, and we'll pick up from where we left off. The evaluations will be sent to you via email. Please complete them. We take those evaluations very seriously. They help us shape upcoming meetings. And that said, I just, again, want to appreciate your time and your commitment, and we will see you on Saturday. Meeting adjourned.